So another long-standing feature of the Fred Conference is the annual member spotlight interview. The role of interviewer has long been a duty of committee co-chairman Bob Bailey, and while it's regrettable that Bob was unable to join us here this year, we have standing in for him the very capable and collegial Dave Newman, who will be hosting our spotlight interview of longtime SABR member, Mr. Andy North. Dave and Andy, the floor and spotlight are yours.
Here. I want to start off by saying that Bob Bailey is a hard act to follow. I know this because he told me so. I am pleased to introduce Andrew North. Many of people here, maybe most of you, know Andrew because he's a frequent Fred attendee. As a career, he was a software developer of statistical applications. He's an avid baseball book collector. He's connected with the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, first as a tour guide, and the selection committee is a member. He's recognized by the Hall of Fame with the Randy Eichen Lifetime Volunteer Achievement Award at the 2017 induction ceremony. He's a director at the Center for Canadian Baseball Research, the lead editor for the SABR publication, Our Game 2, and he maintains the research library at the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. My first question, do I call you Andrew, Andy, or Drew? Can we all agree? Okay, then. Okay. Got your voice. Okay, so you're not originally from this hemisphere, correct?
Yeah, I'm an Englishman, I guess you can tell. But my father, he was a little bit peripatetic. When he finished his schooling, he left England for the colonies, and he couldn't decide, I think, whether to be in academics or industry. So he went back and forth a few times, one job to another. The end result being that we moved quite a bit when I was young. So I ended up going to public school in the San Francisco Bay Area, and then high school and university in Ottawa, Ontario.
I did a little research in advance, and I found that the distance between St. Mary's, Ontario, and San Francisco's Oracle Park is 2,168 miles, or 3,490 in kilometers to make you feel comfortable. How'd you come to root for the Giants?
Well, that's an easy one. The Giants came first, and living in Canada came second. We were living in San Francisco in 1958 when the Giants moved west from New York. So the entire family became Giants fans kind of overnight, the same way the city did, the entire city. I moved around quite a bit after that, but the Giants were part of our livelihood. In fact, probably it was my mother more than anybody else, because I remember when we moved there, we didn't have a TV or anything like that, and I wasn't reading newspapers in those days. So the exposure to baseball was on the radio. And I do remember a couple of things that seem funny now about that. One of my favorite players was an outfielder with a very exotic name. His last name was Palou. His name was Philly Palou. And I thought this guy was great. And then I was sitting on the back porch in 1959 when Willie McCovey was called up from Phoenix to face Robert Roberts. And I had my rudimentary scorebook in front of me, and I wrote his name down, MCCUBBY, because I'd never heard of him. I didn't know who he was. But my mother was involved in the PTA, and one of the events that she arranged was some of the local Giants who lived in the area over the winter to attend the school and give a presentation. So I went to the principal's office, and I met Stu Miller and Jim Davenport and Mike McCormick and a Red Sox first baseman named Don Gili, who all of those players lived in the San Mateo area over the winter. That's where we lived, San Mateo down the peninsula. And then I had another brush with McCormick later because when my parents bought me my first baseball glove, they took me to a sporting goods store in San Mateo named Darcy's, and it was owned and operated by Mike McCormick's father. And McCormick happened to be behind the counter that day, so he sold me my first baseball glove.
Oh,
Those are the days, of course, when the players had to have real jobs in the winter. And then we left San Francisco in 1961. My father went back to academics again. I told you ping pong back and forth. And we left in 61, and of course, in 62, they won the pennant with a team, by the way, that Bill James later identified as one of the top 10 teams of all time. Anyway, they won the pennant. So my mother hopped on a plane, flew back to San Mateo to stay with our next door neighbors. She was there for a week to watch the World Series, and she saw nary a game because all it did was rain for a week.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's right. You can see you are an enthusiastic fan. This all came about because I went up to St. Mary's to visit with Andrew. He was a very gracious host along with his wife, Elena, who's around here somewhere, I believe. And he showed me some of his memorabilia, and this is the one devoted to the San Francisco Giants. But I understand you're something of an athlete as well.
Well,
Oh, by the way, we have a little picture of the scoreboard.
oh yes, that was in the 2010 World Series. So I was in my 53rd year of being a Giants fan before they won anything. I was beginning to wonder. I was feeling positively Maple Leafian. Anyway, they finally won. So Elena and I hopped on a plane and we went back to San Francisco because we weren't going to miss this. So we saw all of the home games in the 10, 12, and 14 World Series. And Elena arranged for this to be on the scoreboard during the game one of the Texas World Series.
That's very sweet. Now you are something of an athlete. We see you both in this team picture.
Oh yes, that's the late great Ottawa Mavericks. We existed for a couple of years. When I was younger, I played lots and lots of schoolyard and pickup baseball, as I'm sure everybody here did. But remember, I told you my father was an academic, so what we did all the rest of the time was schoolwork. So I didn't play in any leagues or anything like that. As an adult, though, once a bunch of us were in our 20s and we'd finished university and when we're working, we decided that we wanted to get back to playing again. So we formed our own team and entered it in a senior baseball league in the Ottawa area. And we played for a couple of years. This image is from a tournament that we won up in the Ottawa Valley in Renfrew. But the claim to fame for that team came later because one of the guys we played against was Doug Frobel. And a few years later, we were watching with great interest as Frobel rose through the Pirates system. And when he made his major league debut, we were all pretty happy because we could finally say we played against a major leaguer. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And we're not going to discuss if it was a major league or not. In fact, here, there's your license plate.
Oh, yes.
And
Yes.
the Mavericks also appear on your email address.
Oh, yes. That's still the name of my fantasy baseball league, too. My fantasy baseball team.
What position did you play?
Center field. I was a disgrace to the number 24.
If in 1982, I had asked you if you would ever envision yourself as a historical researcher, considering that your background is in statistical analysis, what would your answer have been?
Well, I would have said you were crazy because you're right. My interest was stats, and my university degree was in statistics. So my work involved that after I graduated, and my interest in baseball, besides the game generally itself, was more on the statistical end of things. And I attended the first couple of analytics conferences and that kind of thing.
But you also had an opportunity to work for Bill James.
Well, sort of. I was a reader of the Sporting News, and there was a small ad in the back of the Sporting News. Bill James was looking for a research assistant. So I took it upon myself to write him a letter, giving him my qualifications such as they were. And he got back to me and he said, you're one of 25 finalists for this position and I can't decide. So I'm giving you all an assignment and please respond to this assignment and I'll make my decision based on this. I don't remember exactly what the assignment was, but there were 10 questions. I remember one of them. It was, how many runs would Boog Powell score if he batted leadoff? And he wasn't looking for an answer like 107 or something like that. He wanted to know how you would go about researching that question. And remember, this was, I think it was 82, it might have been 83. So all that was available was Big Mac, the Sporting News guides. That was pretty much it. So using those resources, he wanted to know how you would analytically approach this. Now, at the time, my partner at the time was not very amenable to moving to Lawrence, Kansas. And I had a full-time job and I was very busy and I knew that I was not going to be able to continue with this. So I wrote him a letter backing out. But at the same time, I took advantage to send him a printout, all the statements that he would need to execute using the computer language I was working with to implement one of his techniques at the time called the favorite toy. I entered the data by hand, showed him how to do it, and I gave him all the calculations just one by one to show him how easy it was. And the example I used was calculating the likelihood that Amos Otis would amass 500 career doubles. And I chose that because I knew that Amos Otis was one of his favorite players. Anyway, I didn't hear back from him, but I think that job eventually went to Craig Wright.
In 1982, you actually joined SABR. Can you tell me a little bit about how you wandered through the various aspects of SABR?
Well, I'd heard about SABR quite a bit before because my book collection was growing at this point. So I was on the mailing list for a number of collectors' magazines and things like that, as well as the Sporting News. And I'd started collecting the old guides by this point. So I'd seen references to SABR during the 1970s. But my impression was that if you were going to be a SABR member at that time, there was an expectation that you were able to immediately become involved with research. You couldn't be a lurker and just subscribe and get access to the publications. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to do that, so I stayed away. And then you guys might remember this better than I, but I think around 1982, something happened. There was a change in direction, or I think they wanted to encourage more membership or something, and they waived that possibly implicit requirement that you had to do active research. So I jumped right in at that point. I've been a member ever since.
Let's turn to baseball in Canada. Of course, you have to compete with hockey and the Maple Leafs, Canadians and all, and as well as football, American and Canadian.
Right.
Do you feel that that the Canadian baseball has been underexposed?
I would say so, yes. We even notice it in St. Mary's. You would think that baseball would have some level of prominence in St. Mary's of all places because it's where the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame is. But to give you some example, we hosted the Canadian Baseball History Conference there last November, and we were restricted to 50 people because of the room size, 50 people plus the organizers. And of those 50 people, 52 altogether, including the organizers, the only people from St. Mary's that were there were me and Scott Crawford from the Hall of Fame. Everybody else was from out of town, which is great in a way because, I mean, it shows that there's interest from across Canada, but there sure isn't much interest in St. Mary's.
Obviously, Canada's made contributions to the sport of baseball. We see that in the Hall of Fame, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. How did baseball come to Canada?
Well, it came to Canada the same way it came to the US. It was imported as a folk game from merry old England. It's in fact, Henry Chadwick almost had it right when he and Spalding were having their debate. He got a lot more right than Spalding did. But we've seen a couple of references more recently to intriguing possibilities that instead of coming from England through the northeastern US for incubation and then migrating northwestwards into Ontario and Quebec for that matter. That's what happened for the most part, and that's the generally accepted timeline and direction. We've seen some references lately, though, to the possibility that some of the folk games may have come directly from England into Canada. Bill Humber found some stuff around 1842, I think, for some games played in Goderich, which is on Lake Huron, just a bit northwest of St. Mary's. The interesting thing is that all the games listed in these articles use the English spellings of the game. So there's a hint there, a suggestion that those games may have come to Canada West directly from the UK without coming through the incubation period.
Let's turn away from to your home away from home, which of course is the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about the origin story of the Hall of Fame. There it is, by the way.
That's the new one. Yeah, well, it started out in Toronto. It was in an area called Exhibition Place, which was next to Exhibition Stadium, the first home of the Blue Jays. And there was a lot of foot traffic down there. And a couple of things happened. There was a bad fraud case that made big news in Ontario, and the Hall of Fame was one of the many victims. But the other thing that happened was the opening of Skydome. And with the opening of Skydome, Exhibition Place lost a lot of its foot traffic. So the attendance at the Hall of Fame went down quite a bit. It's too bad because it was a pretty neat place. They had Babe Ruth's car in there, and it was kind of an interesting place to visit. Anyway, the hall went into kind of hibernation for a couple of years. And then the Toronto-based board virtually put it up for tender. And something like 30 municipalities applied. And it got down to a final between St. Mary's and Guelph. And Guelph had a very strong case because of their history in Canadian baseball. We may be able to talk more about that later, but Guelph had a big influence on Canadian baseball. But I think St. Mary's won because they had 32 acres of land and they had a building already to put it in. And so they were able to actualize their vision of a campus of diamonds on the 32 acres surrounding the building itself.
There was the particular field that you pointed out that contained features of other Canadian stadiums.
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, there's a campus of 4 diamonds. The main one is the main baseball diamond, and the Canadian junior national team trains there, and there's a lot of weekend competitions going on there. But that's very interesting. If you go, and I was able to play on that diamond 2 or 3 times. It's just wonderful to play on. But for an outfielder, it's a bit tricky because there's all kinds of nooks and crannies in the outfield fence. It's not a smooth arc. And that's deliberate because what they did when they designed that diamond was they incorporated the dimensions of Canada's famous minor league ballparks into the dimensions there. So, for example, the distance down the right field line was to be the distance down the right field line in Delormier Stadium in Montreal, where Jackie Robinson played. Similarly, the outfield dimensions were from Labatt Park in London and Nat Bailey Stadium in Vancouver and places like that.
There are a couple of key things that you pointed out in my private tour of the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. One of them is this.
Yeah, well, if you've ever lain awake at night wondering what on earth does the Cy Young Award look like, well, that's it. That is Fergie Jenkins' Cy Young Award from 1972 with the Cubs. So he donated that to us. And recently, Pedro Martinez gave us his Cy Young Award with the Expos. So we've got two of these now.
Oh, very nice.
Mhm.
You also have this baseball that you talked about.
Oh, yes, that's a ball signed by the entire 1946 Montreal Royals team with Jackie's signature front and center. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Mhm.
How did you become involved with the Hall of Fame?
Well, I guess part of it would be tied into my book collection. My book collection had grown by this point. I had no connection with the hall until after I retired. I retired when I was 56, so I still had lots of time left. So I started doing various volunteering things. And one of them was volunteering as a tour guide at the hall. So I did that for a while. And while I was doing that, I was also helping them with their book collection because they had quite a few books that people had given them willy-nilly over the decades. So there was no rhyme or reason there was no theme or anything like that. So I tried to organize them, hoping that someday maybe I could merge that in my own collection. So I was keeping one eye on that, but after I'd been volunteering for a while, I saw some areas where I thought they might be able to use some help. They didn't have much in the way of staffing or anything like that. So I talked to a couple of people, including Bill Humber, and I said, how do you think I might go about helping somehow? And they said, apply to serve on the board. So fine. So I sent an application in. I got it off online, filled it out, and they wanted 2 references. So I said, okay, fine. So I gave them John Thorne and Bill Humber. So I said, I've got you guys over a barrel. You can't possibly turn me down. So they turned me down. Because what happened was they said, well, you know about baseball history, so we want you on the selection committee instead. And if you're on the selection committee, you can't be on the board because of possible conflict of interest. So they said, no, you can't be on the board, be on the selection committee instead.
We have a copy of the nomination form and a bunch of Hall of Famers in Canada.
Yep.
So that's how you got involved in the selection committee itself, correct?
Yes, because I was already a volunteer at the hall. I was already giving tours to the museum and that kind of thing.
How does the voting process work?
Well, the first step is that somebody has to nominate a candidate, and anybody can nominate any candidate, right? So people off the street can just nominate somebody. As you can imagine, the list of nominees can become a bit unwieldy. So there are rules in place about minimum number of votes and things like that. But what happens is the staff at the hall then collates all the material that people give them, documentary evidence supporting the argument for this person's induction, that kind of thing. And they distribute it to the selection committee, and the selection committee is supposed to read over all this reams of stuff and make their own judgment about who qualifies and who doesn't. And then there's a secret vote. So.
You have another position as a director of the the Center for Canadian Baseball Research. What's the mission of the center? What is its purpose?
Well, I guess we have to go back a little bit, and we blame everything on the Fred, because what happened was a number of us we started to come to this conference, and one thing I noticed was there were a number of Canadian participants, and B, there were a number of Canadian presenters as well. So it wasn't just people listening. So I spoke to another person named Brian Marshall. He used to attend this conference and present. And he and I thought that possibly we could do something similar in Canada. He thought it was a good idea. So I sent out a few trial balloons and got some fairly positive feedback. So we decided to bite the bullet and try one in 2016 in St. Mary's. So the conference actually came first before the center did. And at this conference, everything is based on this conference. It's a copycat. So we have the same structure for the presentations. We try to have a panel discussion. We even had a recreation of an old game. I'll tell you about that because there's a good story about that. We did a recreation of the championship game of the 1877 International Association Championship. So between the London Tecumsehs and Pudgalvin's Alleghenies. And we did what Bill and Joanne and John did a few years ago. We had an on-field reporter and we had a play-by-play person. And our play-by-play guy was a real professional play-by-play guy. He was the play-by-play guy for the London Knights hockey team because this was happening in London. And there was a good moment there because the key blow in that decisive game was struck by Foghorn Bradley, George Bradley for the Tecumsehs. He had a triple in the sixth inning that drove in a couple of runs. And the announcer, above the rising din of the color man, Bill Humber, and on-field reporter, Chip Martin, gave a tip of the cap to Tom Cheek and the Jays when he said, touch 3 out of 4, George, you'll never hit a bigger triple in your life. So, so
Is there a partnership between the center and the Hall of Fame?
Nothing official. The relationship between the two is that once we actually formed the center after the conference, I was able to talk Bob Barney and Bill Humber into becoming directors with me to lend credibility to it, because otherwise it was just going to be me and nobody would join. Mm-hmm. So they lent some credibility to it. And at that point, coincidentally, the Hall of Fame was getting ready to do a major expansion and renovation. And this gave me my opportunity to do something with my book collection. So I was finally able to, once they moved into the new place, the bigger building, they had room for a research library. So I was able to merge my collection with what they had and get it all organized. So at that point, the Center for Canadian Baseball Research came into being, and the relationship we have is they physically house the research library, and the center maintains it on a volunteer basis.
Let's talk about that research library, which I think that's your real main focus of the time that you spend at the Hall of Fame. What was your role in organizing and maintaining the library?
Well, I did it. I mean, that's my office. Yeah. What happened was the Hall of Fame had their own collection of books that had been donated over the years. As I said, there was no rhyme or reason to it, but within a span of a couple of years, they got a couple of major donations, so that now the status is that there are, between books and magazines combined, there's more than 10,000 publications there. About 2/3 of them are books and the others are magazines. And when I say magazines, I don't mean only magazines. I mean programs and scorecards and that kind of thing. But it's the amalgamation of 4 collections. One is the original Hall of Fame collection, which was just random stuff. Then they got a large donation, 2,400 books from a collector in Toronto that focused on, I'd say, biographies and first editions and autographed copies of things. So it was a book collection for the purpose of collection rather than for research, okay? Which was fortuitous, because mine was the opposite. Mine was Mine had definitely a research focus, and the collectible aspect didn't matter. For example, I deliberately had a lot of my old guides rebound, which you would never do for collecting purposes, but I did it on purpose so that people could actually open them and lie them flat and read from them. Okay. So the bottom line was there was very little overlap among these collections, which was great for the Hall of Fame. And then the fourth one, so my donation became the third one. The fourth one was from the Harry Simmons collection. And that was a very important collection. We'll, if we have time, I'll tell you about some of the 19th century stuff in there. But he had a lot of material from his decades of work with the International League and the Commissioner's Office for 4 or 5 decades of work. And he was a collector as well and a 19th century baseball researcher. So there was a lot of good stuff in there. So what you see here is something like 30% of the collection. The rest of it's in boxes. But it now is all cataloged at least. So now, A, they know exactly what they have, and B, they know how to get at it.
You had a major role in the cataloging, correct?
I
In
did
the
it, yeah,
databases.
starting in 2008. Yeah.
Mhm. Can anyone use the library? How does that work?
Yes, it's well, this basically is our equivalent to the Giamatti Research Library. So it's open to the public. Anybody can use it by appointment. Obviously, it's not a lending library. You can't take out the 1861 Beatles Guide and take it home with you. But
You want me to return it?
yeah,
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
It's an impressive room because it extends well beyond those shelves outward in a climate controlled.
Yes, well, what you see there is just the library part of it, but it's part of a larger room that is the archival storage area for everything in the museum that is not currently on display. So there's a lot of all the three-dimensional artifacts are in there as well. And that's where the curator works. Yep.
You showed me. Uh-oh. Hate technology.
Well, while you're doing that, I'll talk about some of the stuff that's in the library.
That's what I was about to show.
I mentioned the magazines. The magazines are more than just magazines. There's a lot of programs, scorecards, as you can imagine, a lot of Toronto Maple Leaf stuff for sure from the International League. But the Harry Simmons collection had a lot of older material as well. So, for example, we've got full run of Baseball Magazine, including the first edition from 1908, and full run of Who's Who in Baseball, including, again, the first issue from 1912. So all that kind of stuff is in there. And for the books, we were very lucky because the focus of the various collections that make up the library, focus has been different from one collection to the next. Very little overlap to the benefit of the overall collection. The stuff that I donated was the research stuff. So it's all the early guides. So all the Beatles, DeWitt, Spalding, Reach, all those guides. The only one I'm missing, and I'm still looking for it, is the 1860 Beatles. So if any of you happens to have a spare copy lying around, please contact me. Otherwise, all the rest of them are there. And things like the Preston Diorum addenda and all the early books that we were talking about earlier today. Yeah.
You had pointed out a couple of special items. This is one of them.
Oh, yes. Now, some of you might, this might seem familiar to some of you. I mentioned the Harry Simmons collection. During the 1930s, Simmons was living in New York and he was unemployed. For a while, he was working as a soda jerk. So he spent a lot of his time in the New York Public Library doing research. And one of the books I went through had a piece of paper fall out, and this was it. So I brought it here a few years ago, probably nearly 10 years ago. And Peter kindly gave me a 5-minute session at the end of the day to ask some questions about the provenance of this thing. Because I don't know if you can read it, but if you look at some of the details, it's pretty clear that it's the score sheet from the third Fashion Racecourse game in 1858. And my question was, first of all, can someone confirm that that's Henry Chadwick's handwriting, which was confirmed? And then the other question was, this is a photocopy. So of what? Where was the original? And John Thorne was able to answer it. He said that the original was in the scrapbook, the Henry Chadwick scrapbooks of the New York Public Library, which makes sense because that's where Simmons was doing his work. And that the original had been torn out of the scrapbook and stolen and has never been recovered. So presumably Simmons was able to get this before that theft happened. Oh yes, and this is also from the Simmons collection. Yes, this is a notebook filled with Simmons handwriting, and what you're seeing there is a book of rudimentary box scores of virtually every game played in the last 4 years of the National Association. 1871 is missing, but 72 through 75 are virtually complete. I think it's 1873 is missing only one game of the entire schedule. And the information in there, so you look 1, 2, 3, 4. So there seem to be 7 columns on that page. So within each column, it's a game, and the players' names are listed, and then there's 4 or 5 statistics given for each player. There's some fielding information as well as the batting information. And he's also got details like the umpire, the attendance, the time of the game, things like that. A separate couple of pages next to the notebook identify the newspaper sources that he used for every year. So my understanding from a conversation with John Thorne was that Simmons was doing this at approximately the same time that Mike Stagno was doing his stuff. I don't know whether they collaborated on it or not, but it's a real wealth of information. What I can't answer is why 1871 is missing. I can venture a guess. I told her that Simmons was unemployed, and I think what he did, he may have started and worked backwards. He may have started with 1875. He was working his way backward, and then suddenly he got a real job and had to stop. That's just a guess. Otherwise, I can't explain why there's nothing for 1871.
That desk has some significance, does it not?
It does indeed. If you're going to have an office, you got to have a desk, right? So this is my desk in my office. And this desk was built for and used by George Sleeman. If you don't know George Sleeman, he's one of the more important figures in early Canadian baseball. He played for the Silver Creek Brewery team in Guelph, and later for the Sleeman Brewery team, also in Guelph. It's his family team. And he later took ownership of the brewery from his father. And the team became the Guelph Maple Leafs, who were the champion team of Canada for most of the 1870s. Sleeman didn't start the team, but he took over when they were already a powerhouse team. But he really put Canadian baseball on the map because in 1874, he took the Maple Leaf team to Watertown to play a tournament against the top semi-pro teams from New York, and the Maple Leafs ran the table in the tournament. That was their first real success against American competition, because for a number of years, American teams have been coming into Canada to do exhibition games. For example, the Atlantics were there in the 1860s, and I think the Exfords visited a couple of times too. And the results were generally very bad for the Canadian teams. So the Watertown tournament changed that. Even in as recently as 1872, Harry Wright had brought the Red Stockings through Ontario, and the Red Stockings just ran roughshod over everybody, 106-3 and stuff like that. Is just terrible. So the success of the Maple Leafs was quite unexpected. And so Sleeman kind of put him on the map. So he was a very important player. Not everything he did was 100% good, because he was one of the early proponents of hiring American import players. And that brought an end to what to that point had been continuous Canadian agency in the both the play on the field and the government of the game in Canada. It was purely Canadian decision making. That became less true when Sleeman started hiring American imports to the extent that in the mid 1870s, when Guelph was a big competitor with London, the London people referred to the Guelph team as the Foreign Legion. It got so bad. But to Sleeman's credit, he actually changed his tune, and later on in life, he became an opponent of the use of foreign players.
I'd like to end with the discussion of this book that I'm sure you're very proud of, Our Game Too. Tell us a little bit about how that came about and what your role was.
Well, again, this is SABR again at work. Because of our conferences and a number of other things, we had a lot of research work that had already been done. So I knew that it wouldn't be difficult to put together a book based on research that had already been written, if we could bring it all together into a consistent theme. So I approached the publications people and with this idea about essays on Canadian baseball, and they bought it. And a lot of the material has been presented earlier as papers at the conferences. But there's an important story about this. We have a photograph of this book being held by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He's grinning into the camera. That's when he was still Prime Minister. But there is a reason for that. There is a connection between the book and Trudeau's family. In the 1930s, Trudeau's grandfather, Charles-Émile Trudeau, who had made his money with a string of gas stations in Montreal, he spearheaded an investment group that rescued the Montreal Royals franchise from bankruptcy. And this became, the Royals then became a powerhouse team and won a couple of the World Series and everything. Very successful team. But it's, when you think about it, connect the dots, it's a very important story. Without Trudeau's rescuing of that franchise, there would have been no Montreal Royals for Jackie Robinson to go to. And remember, the other Brooklyn farm teams were all in the South at that time. And without Robinson's success in Montreal and Montreal's success at hosting him, who knows what the National League, how the National League would have viewed Montreal's expansion proposal. And without what happened in Montreal, who knows what would have happened with the Blue Jays expansion proposal. So Canadian baseball could have had a very different outcome if Trudeau hadn't stepped forward in the mid-30s.
Interesting. We should give a lot of credit to the people who wrote the essays. Many of them are here.
They
members
probably
of
are.
the
Yeah,
Fred,
there are a number of them here. Yeah.
and certainly in the 19th Century Committee.
Yeah, exactly right.
And I understand, while I was visiting you, you were waiting for the publication of a book.
Yes, and it's now out, and it's now for sale in the Giamatti Center. Until recently, well, okay, when we formed the Center for Canadian Baseball Research, there were three things we wanted to do. One was host this annual conference, which we do. The second one was to maintain the research library at the Hall of Fame. But the third one was to somehow publish the research of our, I won't say members because we're not a club, but contributors, if you like. The farthest we got until this book was that we would post the presentations from the conference to our website. The book changed all that, thanks to SABR. But we had never actually published anything ourselves, and that just changed in December when the center published Bill Humber's latest book. That's the culmination of something like 4 decades of work into the history of baseball in Ontario. So it's now available, and if anybody's interested, it'll be for sale tomorrow when we do our
That's perfect.
book thing again. Yeah.
Very good. That was your contribution, one of your contributions to the book. You had 3 essays, but it was on the famous Beachville game.
Yes, now that's not original research. What I did there was I collected all the material that Bob Barney and Bill Humber had worked on, and I brought it up to date with some stuff and presented at the last conference. This is the plaque for the Beachville game that's in the Hall of Fame, and those names are the people that played in that game, mostly local farmers.
Angel, we need to thank you for your outstanding contribution, not just to Canadian baseball, 19th century baseball, and of course to baseball in general.
Oh,
Thank you
thanks
very
for having
much.
me.